All right, we're going to look at one of the key tools that we need to complete our next project looking at vinyl stickers, and that is the Pathfinder tool. So on your screen in front of you, you'll see duplications of the exact same set of objects, a red rectangle and a blue star. I've got one up here at the top. That's going to serve as sort of our original model. And there are 10 more down here because there are 10 Pathfinder options that we're going to look and see what they do. So the first thing I want to point out is that these are just two random objects sitting on top of each other. I'm going to flip over to my outlines view with Control Y, just so you can see these are just two objects sitting on top of each other every time. So the Pathfinder tools are really useful for combining shapes into a single object and letting Illustrator do that perfectly. So the Pathfinder will be somewhere on your right hand side. Mine happens to be right here about halfway down. If you don't see yours or you can't find it, you can always come up to Window, scroll down to where it says Pathfinder, and make sure there's a check mark. If there's not a check mark, click on it. If there is already a check mark there, it means it's somewhere over here. You just have to figure out where exactly in your window it is because they're all a little different. Now, to make this a little more visible, I'm going to drag mine out just so that it's up in front, and then I'm going to shrink this other window because we don't really care about that. And we'll arrange the screen a little more zoomed in, make it a little easier to see. So my Pathfinder has 10 options. It's got 4 shape modes and it's got 6 Pathfinders. Now, in general, you're probably only going to end up using 2 or 3 of these on a regular basis, but I do want to show you what all of them do. So again, here's my original model, so that you can see what each of them does, what it started as, excuse me. And we're going to go through each of the Pathfinders in the same pattern that they're found in the Pathfinder box. So to use Pathfinder, you have to have selected multiple objects. You can do that either by dragging a box around 2 objects or more, or you can click on one, hold down Shift, and click on the other. So once you have these selected, we're going to come over to the Pathfinder. We're going to go to the very first one, which says Unite. And it gives you an option. It tells you a little bit what it's doing. You can create compound shapes, but we're just going to go ahead and click on Unite. That's a single left click. Now, very obviously, the very first thing that changes is the color changes. Okay, our red rectangle turned into blue, just like the star. And the next thing I want to do is we're going to go into our outlines and we're going to actually look at what it looks like in the outlines. So while we can physically see that they're now both blue, if we look at the outlines, we see the first change. What it's done is it's taken the 2 objects and merged them together. And what it's done is it's seen where they connect and connected those 2 points and eliminated the rest of it. So now we have partial rectangle, partial star, attached to each other. This makes it a single object which can then be refilled with different colors however we want to do it. So this is our very first one. This is Unite. Okay. Our second Pathfinder, I'm going to go ahead and select our second object and select both of those. And I'm going to come over to my Pathfinder and hold my mouse over there. It says minus front. So a couple of things should be very obvious. It's going to have something to do with the front object or the object that's on top in the layer stack. And then it's going to minus it. It's going to remove it. So if we click on this, right off the bat, we can see that it has used that star kind of as a cookie cutter to cut away where it was overlapping with our rectangle. If I look at my outlines, we get that same single object with the outlines there as well. So this is our second choice. This is minus front. So these are our first 2 pieces. Our third one, if I select these, come over here. If we hold our mouse over, it says intersect. If I click on this, you'll notice that it immediately goes to only the places where both objects existed is left. And you'll notice that it took the star and that color is what was remaining. That's because the star was on top. It defaults to whichever one is on top being the primary. Again, if I look at my outlines using Control Y, I can see that all that's left is this chunk of the piece where they were both overlapping. And so we're going to take this one, we're going to make sure this one's labeled intersection. Okay, so that was our intersect or intersect instead of intersection. So our fourth one is called exclude. And we're going to select our two objects and click on our fourth option, which is exclude. And you'll notice right off the bat, we get kind of the opposite of our intersect. Instead of only leaving where they were overlapping, it has removed everything that they were touching. Now, when we look at this one with our outlines, it's going to look a little different. It still looks like the initial shape up here. What happened? Well, it has taken this outer box, but when it reaches this point, it comes up into the star shape and goes over and around. And our star comes up and then down. It's a little easier to see if I actually take and pull them apart a little bit. Okay, I had to ungroup them, but I can pull them apart and you can see that we have two distinct objects even when we go into our outline view. So the option for exclude just says, hey, we're going to create these two shapes and we're going to remove any place that they overlap. So this is our exclude option. Those are our four shape modes. Those just take two overlapping shapes and cut them based on how they lay on top of each other. So let's jump down to our Pathfinders and see how they are different and how they are the same. So selecting my first two objects, go to my Pathfinders, it says divide. I'm going to go ahead and click on divide. And right off the bat, nothing seems to change. I can look at my outlines. And again, nothing seems to have changed. It still looks very much like my original. But now there's really no change. If I come back to look at my shapes, click on this, it looks like one object. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ungroup it with Object Ungroup. And now if I click and drag, you'll notice I have three separate shapes. Excuse me. So what it's done is it's taken everywhere that the lines overlapped and it's cut the object. It's divided it based on where those lines are. So it creates three shapes. Similar to our exclude, except instead of just removing this piece, it created its own shape inside. Next up, we're going to go to our second Pathfinder. This is trim. I'll go ahead and click there. And again, nothing appears to have changed. We can come into our outline view. Nothing appears to have changed. I'm going to go ahead again, ungroup these. And well, what's it done? It's cut this shape based on the star. Why is this different? Well, in minus front, we cut the shape based on the star, but we also eliminated the star. In this case, when we use trim, it uses this top shape to cut the bottom shape, but it leaves the top shape intact. So this is our trim option. Third of our Pathfinders is called merge. If I click on merge, well, again, visibly, nothing seems to have happened. I'm going to go ahead again, look at my outlines. No changes in my outlines. I'm going to go to Object and Ungroup. Well, look at that. It looks very much like trim. So what's the difference? Well, for right now, there's really not for our purposes. We're actually not going to see a big difference between trim and merge because merge is generally used with something called a compound shape. And we haven't really worked with compound shapes yet. So for our purposes right now, merge and trim are essentially the same. Our next option is called crop. We're going to click on crop again. And look what happened. This looks very much like our intersect. But when I click on it or look at my outlines, the star is still there. Okay? This is essentially a non-destructive intersection. Where you actually get to keep the shape of the star intact for you to do stuff with. For example, I can take that star and I can fill it with another color. So it's a way to get colors and shapes inside of one another. Okay? And that is again called crop. We'll label that one as well. My fifth Pathfinder is this option right here called outline. If I click that button, well, what happened? it looks right off the bat like we've lost our fillings. If we look at our outlines, we see that all of our outlines are still there. It's a little hard to see. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, just make it a little more obvious. But I'm going to come up and again go Object and Ungroup, just so we can see what it's done here. If I drag that up and drag this away. So what it's done for our outline is it's shaped each of our pieces. We have our intersect piece, we have our star and our rectangle, but they're no longer connected. They are actually separated out from each other. Okay? This is useful for breaking pieces apart to create shapes that you can then use later on to create third objects. So again, that is called outline. And again, it's not one that we use a whole lot, but you should know that it exists. So getting back to our original zoom, I'm going to take our last one here, and we're going to come up to our last Pathfinder, which is minus back. And if we click on that, well, what did it do? It cut out our rectangle from our star in the front. So this one is the opposite of our minus front. Okay, if you crawl up here with minus front, the star was on top, so it removed it from the backwards, or the back object. Over here, we're minus back, so it took the object in the back, the rectangle, and removed it from the star in the front. But those are our 10 Pathfinders. And in all honesty, most of what you're going to use is unite, divide, trim, minus front, and minus back. Those are the primary ones that you'll use as you work through each of the next stages, working into creating your vinyl cutout, because you have to have shapes that are single pieces for the actual cutter to read them. But that's the introduction to the Pathfinder tools, and that's what you're going to be practicing coming up next.